call the September 2nd meeting of the Community Budget Advisory Committee to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes?
I'm going to move the approval, but I was also going to, is there any way we could set some schedules, time schedules on some of the items?
Yeah, let's, just as a kind of advisory to the staff, if we could try to keep each of the items at about a half hour, that'd be great. Seems like with these departments, that ought to be a possibility, so, okay. With that, did I
Move the approval.
I heard a motion for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Next up is item number 3, the approval of the minutes.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second for approval of the minutes?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the minutes be approved. Any discussion? Hearing none, we will come to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries unanimously. On to number 4 and 4.1, the information and updates. Kari.
Thank you. Good evening, chairs and committee members. For tonight's information and updates, I'm going to bring up our deliverables. Oops. There we go. And just a reminder where we're at. We are now in September, and what's going to be coming up in September will be finalizing 3 to 4 revenue scenarios, and then 3 to 4 budget scenarios will be due in early November to the council. And just as a reminder that co-chair Steve Peterson presented to the council this past Monday night for a recommendation from the committee for the preliminary tax levy, and the city council will be voting on that at the September 14th council meeting. And then just, again, would like to...
Let me just, can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman? On the deliverables, could we get more specific on revenue scenarios and budget scenarios as a date specific? Here's my concern, is that I don't think we're going to do the council and the mayor any good if we back them so late that they don't have any time to react or to amend, or to review, or to reject. And I think it's up to us to narrow these timelines, since we're talking the next, 5 weeks?
Mr. Chair and Mr. Co-Chairs and committee members, I think that's a good observation that Co-Chair Peterson is making. And I think that what's reflected here is going back to what the agreement was in July or June, that we were going to take a revenues-based approach. And at that time, I think we were focused on trying to, through the revenue scenarios, identify what those 3 or 4 were going to be. And I think we're in a better position to do that now than I think we thought we would be in June or July. So we can probably do this in the middle of September and then get to the budget scenarios quickly. Just as a reminder for committee members, the department directors were given their targets for reductions a couple weeks ago. They'll be submitting those to city manager's office next Tuesday, and then we will be discussing those with the committee on the 16th. So what we will probably do on the 16th is try to identify the different revenue scenarios, and that's getting at, do you want to do a 1, 3, 5? What is it that we really want to put together as options for the council from the levy and the worst case or the moderate case scenario, and then start to talk about what those department submittals look like. And then on probably the 23rd and the 30th is get more deeply into the recommendations from the departments on those reductions. So I think that you'll see these budget scenarios. That's the end point of when we will land on the budget scenarios for council recommendations. We'll start talking about those at the end of September.
Follow-up question, if I may?
Just one other point I want to make before you follow up there, Neil, is that if you look at how we've delivered on these other things, these dates up here are the dates that we're reporting to the council. And so necessarily we want to have the budget scenarios done in kind of middle to late October in order to be able to deliver that to the council then. And that allows them 4 regular meetings, the 2 in November and the 2 in December, to consider kind of what we put forward. So I think that's originally what the timing was. If we got done early and delivered before that, I don't think that anybody would complain. But that was the original timing, is it gave them 4 regular meeting bites at the apple and potentially 1 or 2 study meeting opportunities in November and December to consider what we put forward.
Okay, well, my question is along those lines. So you have given them targets. The different departments have specific cut targets.
They
Is
do.
that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
And so we will see your recommendation. They'll give a budget to you. You'll recommend then to us, and our job then is to reinforce those cuts.
So
Are they your
co-chair,
cuts or they're our cuts?
co-chairs and committee members. So I think the way that we're going to do this is we will share with the committee members the recommended, or at least the cuts that have been put together by the department directors. And we'll probably do that in a big group. And then the next step that we'll go through is to put those into 3 different bundles probably. And so that'll be based on the scenarios that the committee agrees to, the revenue scenarios, whether it's a 1% levy increase or a 3% levy increase or whatever that number is. So we'll bundle the different recommendations. What's going to need to happen around those bundles is the discussion of priorities, right? So when we get the recommendations from the department, trying to weigh, if we're going to do fewer cuts, what are the ones that seem like the least painful? And if we're going to end up doing more cuts, what are the priorities for how we're going to do those? Recommending those to council, so that we have basically 3 different menu options for the committee to consider recommending.
So those recommendations are going to be a number specific, $5.2 million based on revenues of X and Y.
Yeah, and the target that was given, or the total target that was given to staff, was about $3.7 million. And without the slide in front of me, Kari, if we were to do a 0% levy in the worst case scenario, I think it's $4.2 or $4.7 million was the total number. So we would have to go beyond what the departments were requested, but I think there are some ways that we can do that too, depending on what the committee wants to recommend.
I have a question, but I don't know what it is. I'm a little confused by the process, I guess, given the 60 hours we've spent here.
Well, let me see if I can answer the question that you haven't asked yet.
Thank you.
I think the real work for the committee is, once you see what staff has compiled in terms of their suggested or possible options for reductions, is to understand the impact of those reductions in terms of how they affect service levels, who in the community is impacted by those reductions, how they, are they short-term or long-term, those kinds of things. And then discuss amongst the committee what you think the priorities are for which ones we should take, which ones we are the least desirable, and then figure out how you bundle those together to get community input, because those are the options we'd like to take out to the community in the middle of October for the engagement round and get feedback and say, if we have a tax levy at this level, this is what you can expect, and respond to that. If you have a tax levy at this level, here's what you can expect. So the work for the committee is to have a discussion around I think the prioritization and the identification and understanding of impact to those reductions.
Okay. We're getting through the hors d'oeuvres, and now we're going to the entrees. Okay. I'm for that.
And I think just, the other point on the schedule that I just want to bring up is that we have for a month or 6 weeks now committed to having a package in the middle of October that we bring to the community and get their feedback on. So necessarily, we can't be done until we get that feedback. So it's not like we can, kind of make a decision in the first week of October and say, okay, we're done. Because we've already agreed that we're going to go to the community and get feedback from people in the middle of October. So from a schedule perspective, that's how it's, if you look at how it lines up, that's how it lines up.
In all due respect, I would agree with that, but you have a city council that's going to have to vote, and you certainly don't want to have them backed into a corner because they're the ultimate responsibility.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think part of by selecting this process and agreeing to the dates that we have, they've agreed that basically that 4 meetings is enough for them to have that conversation. Because we've been
the council has agreed to 4 meetings?
Well, we agreed that we would go in early November, and that leaves them 4 meetings to have that conversation. There's nothing radical or different about the schedule this year versus any other year. That was set up intentionally because it allows them that period of time to do that. So if there's anybody in the council who's surprised by that, it's because they're not paying attention. It's not because there's something that's changed under the covers, and that's when we've talked to the manager about it. That's the process that we've talked about. And they can choose if they need more meetings, they can make more meetings to talk about it. That's completely within their domain to be able to do that. But I think when we put the schedule together this summer, we intentionally landed it so that the package that, basically our work is nearly all done at the end of October after we get the feedback from the community and make final changes to the packages. We may get questions from the city council where there may be a meeting where the city council says, what do you think about X? What do you think about Y? Where they ask us for feedback on specific questions that might occur in November or December that isn't scheduled right now. But I think those meetings would be fairly straightforward meetings because they're not going to require the same mass of discussion. They're probably going to be asking about if we substituted this for that or did X or Y. What do you think about that sort of thing, and get our feedback on it.
Thank you for indulging me.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, Steve Peterson, I don't want to interrupt Kari's report because she's in the middle of that, but it might be good to give the committee a quick report out on the presentation to the council and the feedback you got from them on Monday night as well.
Yeah, so before I do that, I had John and you had your hand up just now, didn't you, or not? No, John, you had your hand up.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I might, this was a pretty helpful conversation for me to think through, just based on having watched that council study session, and some of what I've been reading has got me sensing that there's a pretty credible school of thought that's getting more pessimistic about the economic outlook, especially the back half of 2021 economic outlook. And so it's against that backdrop that I asked this question. I appreciate that you, Mr. City Manager, laid out a target that you asked the departments to chase, and they must be chasing that now, probably feverishly, and I could picture how it's going. But I'm wondering, in light of some that's you might be hearing in the community or might have divined from the council, plus potentially deteriorating economic conditions from what I think our discussion led to, do you feel like, sort of to Neil's question, are we going to have a collision of not enough information? Do you think we're going to have enough choices if some discussion leads us to wondering about a 0% levy and worst case scenarios? Now, will there be enough data that will have been gathered so that we can jump into that kind of horrible of horribles?
Yep. Co-chairs, committee members, John, thank you for the question. I think the answer is yes. The one big unknowable is what's going to happen with the lodging industry for our budget purposes. And the admissions tax is also part of that question, but there's a lot less volatility to that than there is to the hotel tax. A couple weeks ago, I was joking with a couple of the committee members that I thought that this group was a little bit of a group of gloomy gusses based on the scenarios and how you're responding to them. because, I was a couple weeks ago pretty confident that our moderate case scenario was where we would be likely to land. And the committee was feeling like the worst case scenario was where you wanted to gravitate towards. All of the data that we've seen in the last couple of weeks is pushing us towards the worst case scenario, that we're probably going to be closer. And unless something dramatic changes in the next couple of months, I think that's probably what we're going to be looking at. And it's largely related to the travel, entertainment, hospitality industry. The fact that business travel has essentially dried up, that the hotels are basically relying on leisure travelers right now. And as you go back to school, leisure travel is drying up as well. So it is looking like it's going to be a longer recovery than what we were looking at maybe a few months ago. And we're adjusting our forecasting internally to recognize that fact. So I think we will have enough information, because I think the things that we're least likely to know are on the revenue side, and it's not necessarily on the expenditure side.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll interrupt your presentation right now and just talk quickly about the conversation at the city council. It sounds at least like John was bored on Monday night and watched the meeting. And so, I went to the city council meeting. For the benefit of the public, we ran through parts of the presentation that we've had here, so that it wasn't just a freestanding discussion about the levy, but we talked about kind of the factors that led up to it. We talked about the 6.44% number that we had there. I'd say that at least the initial reaction of the council was that there was a set of people who are willing to accept that on the idea that it wouldn't turn out to be the reality of it, and there were people who were not willing to accept it as a number. And it was somewhat split, although I suspect as people think about it more and look ahead to 22, they may want a little bit more flexibility in that area. It's unclear where they will end up, but I think the sense that I got is that the preliminary levy will be above our kind of high revenue scenario that we put forward. So in terms of the three scenarios that we have, it's not really going to change that. It's just going to inject more risk. And if what the manager talks about around the economy going sour, it's going to inject more risk on that side if they select a lower number. And it also necessarily has impacts with 22 with the restructuring of the tax base in the city as a result of the value changes that will happen at the end of the year. There was certainly was no consensus at the meeting that, here's what the thing that we're going to select is going to happen. I don't think we'll really know until the meeting on the 14th, which is the next scheduled council meeting, and that's the meeting where they need to make the decision. So it seems like on the 16th we'll hear back from the staff, or if people want to watch the council meeting, they can watch that and see what the discussion is at the council. But my expectation based on the conversation I saw is that it will end up between that 5 and the 6.44% number for the preliminary levy.
When there was resistance to the levy number on the part of some of the council, was that a strong resistance where they're digging in their heels? Can you interpret that?
I think there's a range of reactions. I think people are there.
They may not want it, but the reality.
Right, and I think the fact is that I think the council members are really sensitive to a lot of people being in tough times right now, and that they've realized that not everyone can afford to pay more in property taxes, and so they're thinking carefully about that, and that's where the reaction is coming from. It's not any more complicated than that. So, with that, I'll hand it back to Kari to continue on.
Okay. So I just want to highlight what we were talking about with getting input from the community, that we have had a couple targeted community partner conversations. We had one a couple weeks ago with the Latino and Latina leaders in the community that the city has a monthly meeting with, and we were able to join that meeting and talk about the budget and get their input. And then yesterday, we had another community partner meeting, and this was with the African and Black leaders in the community. And so we will continue to have those meetings. We have one scheduled with seniors from Creekside that are part of Creekside Community Center, as well as there is one with the Chamber of Commerce on September 16th. And then we have the citywide listing sessions that will be via Zoom. And those are September 17th and then September 19th. And that right now it's getting just letting people know about the budget, the shortfall, the gap that we have right now for 2021, and getting their input on the services that they value and ideas they have for solving the budget shortfall. And then in October, the 15th and the 17th will be an opportunity to share the different budget scenarios that the committee has put together to get the input of the community again. And then wanted to highlight, last week I said the website Let's Talk Bloomington went live, and you can get to that from the city's homepage, or directly to it by that link right there. And that has an opportunity to take a survey, a really short survey about the budget, or ask questions, or put ideas about Bloomington. So just want to take that opportunity to highlight this again. And then the last thing I have, coming back, there's a question about just internal service funds and the different funds. So just wanted to put that information here. And it's been a few weeks since we've seen you've had lots of information about the different funds in the city and the budget and everything that goes into the property tax levy. But just to come back, because it is a large number. And you saw when the departments are presenting their information, you see the internal charges. So just a very brief kind of refresher. And if you want even more detail, if you go back to the presentation from July 22nd, it has much more detailed information. But I won't read through all of these, but these are the 8 internal service funds. And in total, the charges out to other funds are $43 million. And those are real expenses of salaries and materials and services and capital that's kind of allocated to the departments that use it in the city. And just a reminder of the purpose of the internal service funds is they provide the goods and services to other funds, but we keep things together, like for instance, like information technology, the IT department, all those costs, the salaries, all the expenses are in one fund, but then it's charged out according to the use across the city to all the departments that benefit from that. And so that it can more accurately reflect the true cost of providing a particular public service. And also what it does when they're in separate funds, it allows for major expenses like a fire truck or other large equipment, vehicles, to be managed over time. So we're building up a working capital balance in order to be able to pay for that when that equipment is due to be replaced, and it doesn't cause a huge spike in the general fund, for example. And that is all I had. If there was any questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Anybody got any questions? Neil?
I do. Thank you for this information. How much of these internal service funds of $43 million are operationally necessary, and how much of it is there to maintain our AAA credit rating? In other words, if we cut it by 10% and decided we'd go with an A instead of a AAA, is that even a discussion point, or am I just smoking something? I'm losing my prosthetic here, excuse me.
Mr. Co-Chairs, I would never suggest you're smoking something. The internal service funds don't necessarily act in the same way that the general fund reserve does when it comes to the bond rating considerations. What the internal service funds do is maintain a working capital balance, because often they are being utilized to pay cash for projects that we're saving up for over a number of years. And so the balances that we're carrying in those funds, as you go back and take a look at each of those funds, generally are planning for future expenses. And with many of the things that are being purchased through the internal service funds, they're not the kinds of things that we would be able to use capital bonding for. So in the IT fund is an example, right? When we have large system replacements or enterprise software that we have to replace, those are not things that we can use capital bonding for. So we have to save up funds for those. There are a couple others that have a little bit more flexibility, and they have balances that are a little higher for auditing purposes or for financial reporting requirements. And the one that I'm thinking of specifically is the Accrued Benefits Fund, because accounting rules require us to have, if not fully funded for our benefits, at least the plan for how we're going to get fully funded. And so I think currently we're in the neighborhood of 90 to 95% right now on our Accrued Benefits Fund, with a path towards 100% in 8 or 9 years we get there. And it's interesting that every year we're still about 8 or 9 years away. But we do show through our long-term planning a way to get fully funded. This is, the internal service charge, if you remember the phrase that kept getting bandied about by our public works director and our chief financial officer about eating our seed corn, that I think this is what Chair Peterson is getting to, is whether those working capital balances are an opportunity for us to whittle into the seed corn to get us through the next couple of years. And I would suggest that we're already doing that, in that we're holding our internal service charges flat from 20 to 21, which is going to have the effect of reducing the working capital balances for the next couple of years.
Maureen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Getting back to the listening sessions, it was mentioned that the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce is holding a listening session on September 16th, and it's from 11 to 1. So an hour can go by very, very quickly. And I would like to make sure that that session is used really for the, meats and, the meats and the potatoes of this whole thing, because you're dealing with some pretty savvy individuals. The other question I have is, I know the Bloomington Chamber maybe has a couple hundred members. So how are you reaching out to the other businesses in the city of Bloomington? Because that is I think it's like 2% of maybe the whole business community.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairs, committee members. Maureen, it's a good question. You're correct about the size of the representation of the chamber, and we spoke directly to the chamber staff about that. And our expectation is that that event hosted by the chamber is for all businesses in Bloomington. It's not restricted to chamber members. We have just this year, because of the pandemic and the city's response to the economic impacts, really done a much better job of developing our contact list with businesses in the city. So you'll recall we had the Small Business Emergency Assistance Loan Program. Our staff has contact information for many, many more businesses than we had before, and we're going to utilize that to help get people to attend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jamie. My last comment would be, is the hospitality industry, the hotel industry, being invited to this? Because I think, based on what we're seeing, the really worst case scenarios for that industry and hotels having some significant issues moving forward, are they included? Will they be, have they been invited as well?
I'll check to see if we're emphasizing that, and if not, I think it's a good point. So we can certainly work through the CVB and through our other contacts to do that.
Mr. Chair, I just know that in the chamber world, hotels and hospitality are not renewing their chamber memberships, so we need to make sure that we're reaching out, because they're going to be the ones that have some major ramifications and implications from this.
Yeah, they don't have any seed corn to eat.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anything else, Kari?
Seed corn.
That's all I had this evening.
Okay, that's item number 4.1. We will move on to item number 4.2, which is the presentation from the legal department. And I see the city attorney, Melissa Manderscheid, up there ready to go.
All right, good evening, chairs and members of the Community Budget Advisory Committee. My name is Melissa Manderscheid, and I'm the city attorney. I'll be presenting tonight for about 10-15 minutes and then taking your questions after that presentation. On the WebEx tonight, I am joined for the Q&A portion by our 2 deputy city attorneys and the city's risk and litigation manager. A few years ago, the legal department revised and updated the department's purpose statement. It's too long for a PowerPoint slide, but I wanted to share 2 guiding statements. Jamie laughs. It's quite long. But I wanted to share 2 guiding statements from it to ground you in the workings of the legal department at the city. First, we seek justice in all we do. We carry out that obligation seriously. We seek just and equitable outcomes for victims, businesses, citizens, residents, and the various stakeholders in each criminal and civil case that we handle in our office. Secondly, we're the city's legal counsel. We work to provide sound, timely, objective, collaborative, and ethical opinions to city staff throughout all of the city's departments, as well as to our elected and appointed officials, boards, and commissions. There are 17 positions in the legal department, including the part-time, shared, and the vacant office manager position. 10 of those positions primarily serve the criminal division, and the balance primarily serve the civil side. I'm going to highlight a few of those positions tonight. The office manager position has been vacant for the past few months. In light of the COVID-related budget pressures of 2020, we made the decision to hold that position vacant. The duties of that position have been taken on by everyone in the department a little bit, which is a temporary solution. The crime victim liaison position is a grant-funded position that is funded with federal and state funds and has a local city match element to it as well. This position is relatively new to the city. It's been here for a couple of years, and it assists victims in accessing the judicial process and participating to provide better outcomes, not only for the victims, but also for our prosecution. And then third, the risk and litigation manager is a position that we share with the finance department. It's a 60-40 split with the legal department on the 40% side of that. And then because some of us are visual people, including myself, I thought I would also provide an organizational chart. It doesn't reflect that office manager position for the reasons that I've highlighted, and we'll get into a little bit later on in subsequent slides. You'll see here that there are 2 divisions, the civil side and the criminal side, and then the risk and litigation manager. So with regard to who are legal's customers, we serve many different customers in the city's legal department. On the criminal side, our client is technically the state of Minnesota and the city of Bloomington. However, we act in service to our justice partners, who are private attorneys, public defenders, and the bench, the public, victims, both individuals as well as our corporate businesses, and multiple police departments, Bloomington, Metro Transit, State Patrol, and Hennepin County, for example. On the civil side, our client is the city of Bloomington, technically. However, we act in service to the public, to our residents, to our community, to the businesses, to our visitors, to the nonprofit organizations, to applicants, potential project submitters, to the boards and the elected officials and other government jurisdictions, watershed districts. So as you can see, it's a lot of different customers who have an opinion about what we're working on. These entities are numerous, and we often have to serve them at the same time. They have competing, complementary, and sometimes adversarial interests, and sometimes all 3 at the same time. We don't necessarily get to pick who we serve at the same time or in conjunction with each other, because we're oftentimes responding to the efforts or endeavors or activities of others. Be it public officials, the public as applicants, or city departments, or other jurisdictions. We also know that our work has the potential to impact racial equity. The most front-of-mind examples of the work that we do in the legal department is from a couple of different areas. One is community development in not only program creation, but also in the ordinances that we work on. Another area is the Community Services Department, which has the support of the co-ed support, which I believe you've heard about in a previous presentation. I've talked a little bit about the legal department's crime victim liaison. That position not only works with victims directly, but also out in the community doing outreach and community building. And then we have criminal prosecution standards. And for example, one of our standards includes a preference for encouraging unlicensed drivers to obtain a valid license by participating in a diversion program. So we regularly advise and work through those examples, but also regularly advise our departments on racial equity issues to ensure the constitutionality of our programs and services, but also to meet our larger city goals. So as I mentioned before, we have two divisions. On the civil side, I included in the packet some written materials, and in those materials is a list of about 17 examples of the work that we do in the civil side of the department. I've highlighted a couple of examples on this slide. As I mentioned a little bit before, much of our work is responsive to the requests that come in or to external events or activities that are happening in the community. However, we also proactively advise our clients so that they can make the best informed decisions when they're out administering programs and implementing and enacting our ordinances. We track and measure our work on over 15 different metrics. I've noted a couple of them here just to give you a sense of the volume of work that we have in the civil division. Our work tends to measure about the same year over year, with some notable examples being data practices requests are incredibly increasing every year. Litigation demands tend to increase, as well as this past year assisting with the rather unprecedented global pandemic. In order to manage all of this, the legal department relies on SharePoint. It's a computer technology that we use to track and process all of the contracts, policies, ordinances, resolutions, and related documents that our department drafts and reviews and processes through the signature process. We have spearheaded the use of a program called DocuSign for the internal and external electronic execution of those documents. And we also rely on Westlaw for our research and drafting assistance. On the criminal side, your written materials includes a longer list of the examples of the work we do, but I've highlighted a few examples here again to give you a sense of the type of work we do in the criminal division. Our city's caseload is the largest of all the suburban jurisdictions in Hennepin County. Our main responsibility within the criminal team is to prosecute the petty misdemeanors, and gross misdemeanors that occur within the jurisdictional boundaries of the city of Bloomington. In addition to that, our staff members also assist in drafting policies and providing advice and training to our officers and in serving on committees throughout the city. As I know you know, 2020 has been unique, and our prosecutors have been working very hard under those very unique circumstances. We've been trying to resolve as many cases as possible electronically, and you might think that that would make the workload less because it doesn't require as many court appearances. However, something that could be resolved in person in court in just a couple of minutes will take multiple staff people and many emails, both internally and externally, to handle the same item outside of the courtroom. So our prosecutors have been very busy. Due to these large volumes, we rely heavily on technology to accomplish the daily services of the criminal division. We rely on a case management system called Lens to track and manage the disposition of all these cases. A Lens has been customized for the City of Bloomington's needs, and we rely on it to keep everything moving. We also rely on some technology in other departments. For example, the police department's body-worn camera technology and the court's electronic filing systems. So looking at 2020, sort of the new normal, as I mentioned, 2020 has been a memorable year so far. Fortunately for the legal department, we already had several initiatives underway in the first quarter of 2020 that we were able to dramatically ramp up to address these wild 2020 challenges. For example, our civil paralegal nearly single-handedly transitioned an electronic document program, that DocuSign program that I mentioned earlier, that we were piloting with one type of document in Q1 to full utilization practically overnight. It's become invaluable to the efficiency and the safety of our workers in the workplace. On the criminal side, we became almost entirely paperless in 2020, in no small part due to the efforts of some brand new clerical and some existing support staff and our new deputy city attorney. The timing of this paperless transition was already started in 2019 due to the court mandating our move from the Southdale courts to downtown Minneapolis, but we needed to dramatically ramp that up and finish it off. And that too became invaluable to ensure the safety and to meet the remote work requirements of our prosecution side in 2020. Much effort has been expended in 2020 in the legal department to fast track previously planned technology integrations, and I've mentioned a few of those, but there were even more going on. We've been working within the city as well as with the city's justice partners to automate the case opening as well as the discovery sharing processes. The hope and goal of these integrations include many things, but not least of which are the cost-effective transfer of data and data entry efficiencies. The timing of all these integrations in 2020, previously planned, was quite fortuitous for us. Finally, every day, members of the legal department are supporting the city's global health pandemic response, be it through the site safety planning and revisions that we've done, the remote work policy updates. We've been revising contracts to make sure that they address COVID concerns. We've also been drafting emergency regulations and all other kinds of things that start with the word emergency, one of which being outdoor patio dining regulations and some other regulations too. Many, many things have been new and unprecedented in the legal department these past 6 months. With regard to the new normal in 2020, we've also had some challenges. This year hasn't, despite all of our successes, it hasn't been without many challenges for us. Although, and one of this is the challenge of criminal court hearings. Many of the courts have moved to report remote hearings. However, Hennepin County Court Administration has been requiring our prosecutors to appear in person. And we've also, because of COVID, had reduced calendars. Our prosecutors appear at the Public Safety Facility and the courthouse in downtown Minneapolis. The reduced calendar sizes have created a backlog of unheard cases, and that backlog continues to grow. We've been working with the court administration to figure out a way to address this, and we're hopeful that we will be able to do that. But we need to be mindful and continue to work to ensure the safety of all those that are involved in the court process. The victims, the lawyers, our crime victim liaison, as well as the defendants and those involved in court administration. As I mentioned, we've had more than our share of emergency response efforts as well in the legal department. We've been working long hours to ensure sound, objective, and reasoned legal opinions during these enduring and unprecedented times. Because we're one of those departments that serves all of the needs of the city and all of the different departments, we oftentimes learn what is going on in each of them. And we become the coordinator of those related efforts and bring together the pieces because we're seeing it all roll through in the legal documents. This role, we believe, has become an invaluable part of the response to these new COVID-related challenges because we have been able to process through extremely large volumes of work and ensure quick turnaround times to get all of this done. The legal department was very fortunate to onboard 3 employees in 2020. However, they all started during the global pandemic. So these new employees have had to learn how to fly by the seat of their pants and adjust their sails as the conditions and circumstances have regularly evolved. Our newest employees are amazingly competent and have proven themselves quite agile. So despite a very unusual first 90 days on the job, they've been critical to the success of our department so far in 2020. I wanted to highlight briefly some of the grants and cost participation that we also have in the legal department. Most of our funding is from the general fund with some limited revenue support from the forfeiture fund, but we also have some grant funds. The crime victim liaison position that I mentioned briefly before is grant funded. There is a city match, and we meet that match through DWI forfeiture funds. The county's IT department, the Hennepin County IT department, has also been invaluable in assisting our department with those integrations that I mentioned previously. And they will dramatically, we believe, increase our efficiencies as well as the customer experience, both internally and externally facing. So the county, in addition to working with us, has also indicated that it is going to provide us with some financial assistance for those tech integrations. So we're very excited about that opportunity as well. We know that 2020 has been a wild ride so far, and we have no idea what 2021 is going to be like. But I want to reassure you that the legal department stands ready to assist the city and the community by preparing and positioning it to respond to those unknown challenges. With the heightened focus on systemic racism and discrimination, for example, and the council's strategic priority of racial equity, the legal department has a role in supporting those efforts. We have, in addition to deepening the cultural competency of our own staff, we have been working on the renewed opportunity to explore the development of additional diversion programs and restorative justice on the criminal side. For those of you unfamiliar with those terms, those are ways that we address criminal offenses outside of the criminal court process and minimize the collateral consequences. They include programming as well as working to decrease the likelihood of the development of a criminal history. These programs can also provide opportunities to restore the damage done to victims, such as their safety concerns. Another opportunity in 2021 is technology. I've highlighted that a few times, and we recognize that technology will continue to have a growing role in how we provide services. We will continue to assist in the safe and efficient deployment of our technology as well as the other technology throughout the city so that we can meet the needs of our city employees as well as our court appearances. Because so much of our budget is related to personnel costs, I thought it would be helpful to provide you with a timeline of our personnel in the legal department. I've discussed the 2020 staffing edits previously in this presentation, so I'll only note here that the 2021 proposed budget changes, the 2021 proposed budget changes the vacant office manager position to a legal administrative assistant. Based on the experiences that we've had thus far in 2020, we believe that the department needs some clerical assistance to help with the processing of department-wide matters, and that we don't have a person in that type of position right now. Right now, we have multiple people performing the same task individually, and that just isn't a very efficient way to get things done. This slide was provided to me by the Finance Department. It's a high-level overview of the department's budget, and I'm providing it tonight to give you a sense of the scale of our budget relative to the other budgets that you've been provided with information on. So with that, that's the final slide, and I stand available for questions. And as a reminder, we have the two deputy city attorneys available also, as well as the risk and litigation manager.
Thank you, Melissa. Maureen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Melissa, thank you for that presentation. Does the city contract out for any other, for general counsel?
Chair and members, chairs and members, the legal department does contract out for legal services. It's a variety of different things. Although the city is there is the city of Bloomington, but then there's also the Port Authority and the HRA. So the Port Authority and the HRA have their own independent legal counsel. So that is contracted out separately because they're separate legal entities, as well as the representation that we have for various matters that are covered by our League of Minnesota Insurance Trust. So we have outside counsel for those matters that are covered by our insurance. We also contract with various other attorneys for workers' compensation matters or employment law matters as they arise.
Mr. Chair, Melissa, so where those contracted services for HRA and for the Port Authority, would that be in those individual budgets, or does this fall in your budget?
Chairs and members, it is not a part of my budget. I have a small line item in the legal budget for outside counsel, and we use that when we encounter a very nuanced legal issue that we know someone else has already looked into, so we'll do a short little contract with a law firm to get, that information or something like that. But no, we do not have those items in our budget.
I'd be interested to see what the total amount of those contracted services are from the outside law firms.
Okay.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Melissa, and all the important work and all the others that are on here is really appreciated, I think, by all of us. I have a question that relates really to the misdemeanor prosecutions, and I know a lot of cities contract that work out. And I just wondered if you folks have looked at that and the pros and cons, whether it's performance or whether it's cost effectiveness of possibly contracting out the misdemeanor prosecution work.
Chairs and members, we have definitely looked at that over the years. We've done as much analysis as is possible. The city has had in-house prosecution for many years, and it's difficult to estimate what a proposal would come in at from an outside law firm. We know that we have the largest caseload of all of the suburban jurisdictions, and we know that we appear in downtown. So there are some things that we know about what it would be like to contract out for those services. And without going out for an RFP, it's difficult to know exactly how much that would be. But yes, we have done that analysis based on our best guesses on the various things that we can predict.
Can I assume that it looks like about 60% of the work and the lawyers and the support staff are in the criminal division here, which would be basically the misdemeanors. Would that suggest that 60% or so of the $2 million is related to that discipline, or would that be a false assumption?
Chairs and members, a couple of years ago, we actually took away the differences in our budget. We used to have a criminal side and a civil side in our budgets and separate codes and all of that sort of thing. And we realized in the process of working on the budget that we spent hours trying to decide what it should it go on the criminal side or should it go on the civil side, because we are a very lean department and we have to be very resilient, and we have some redundancies in staff training redundancies there. So, for example, we have a civil attorney right now that's working on preparing a brief to I believe the Supreme Court, and she's being supported by an attorney on the criminal side, a prosecutor. And then we had another one that was drafted by a prosecutor that was being supported by a civil attorney. So that's an example of on the attorney side where we support each other across the way. And then similarly, there are a lot of issues that don't cut cleanly on criminal and civil. So oftentimes, just as an example, most, if not, many of our violations of our city code are technically criminal violations. But we also have an administrative, more civil process that we can use to enforce the code as well. So there isn't always a very clean line in how that cuts out, and it became so muddy that we actually merged them together. So long answer to your question, but no, I think is probably the answer.
Sure, thanks, that's helpful. And the last one sort of in these lines is I know that a lot of the larger private firms and other private firms have a pretty serious pro bono commitment, and in some instances that includes having private firm lawyers essentially loaned out to some of the prosecution offices or cities to do some of the prosecutions. Mm-hmm. Have you ever looked at that? Does that save money? Does that cost money? Does that work? Or do you know?
Chairs and members, I haven't looked at the cost efficiency of a program like that. We have done some initial research in years past about bringing on a law clerk, because as a law clerk you can get student certified to appear in court. And we've looked at the possibility of that as a way of broadening our resources. And quite frankly, our 4 prosecutors prior to bringing on the deputy were were carrying extremely large caseloads per attorney, and we weren't confident that we could provide the level of guidance in teaching that someone in that position would need to learn, given the heavy caseloads. We now have 5 people that are available to appear for us in criminal court, and so it's certainly something we could look into. But at this time, we don't have a contract with one of those firms to do that.
Thank you. Akia.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions about the restorative justice and diversion programs. Are those managed through the city of Bloomington or through Hennepin County? I guess the funding of it and the specific program details.
Chairs and members, the one program that we use the most right now is a driving diversion program, and that's contracted through a third party. The participant in that program pays for their participation in it, and it's through a third party vendor of sorts. I know that we do work with the police department and its efforts out in the community related to restorative justice, as well as with with Ms. Jackson in the city manager's office on some newer initiatives, but we don't have a broad array of restorative justice programs underway right now, and we hope to do that in 2021. Do more of that in 2021.
Josh.
Mr. Chair, members, Melissa, thank you. Good presentation, very helpful, very informative. I want to kind of dig into kind of just in the weeds a little bit as I'm trying to work through some options I'd like to share with the commission here. But I am aware of some cities in the metro that have developed kind of public-private partnerships to help raise funds to fix up kind of public infrastructure, i.e. baseball fields, softball fields, ice rinks, community centers, you name it. And I'm just struck by the challenges that we have before us. 1, revenue increases. 2, cuts in funding, which could translate to less services for the public. But also this question that just nags at me of the public infrastructure. A lot of the buildings here were opened roughly at the same time, and they're coming of age where they need significant investment to just be maintained, let alone enhanced. So I'm wondering if, what the kind of, how long, like legal review, that process around developing some creative solutions that could be potentially brought to the commission here to find additional revenues to help us maintain high quality services for the public, kind of how you approach that maybe strategically, or if there's things that we can look at that we haven't looked at in the past more seriously. So I just kind of wanted to get your general thoughts about that as we're working through these issues.
Chairs and members, a couple of things come to mind in response to your question. The one is that the city does have an existing naming policy now. That policy addresses, like I would call them, benches and trees, that sort of level of structures, improvements to real estate. We have, I can't remember the last time. I know there was an effort to update that. I don't know if it was completed or if it's still underway. I know that it was definitely started. And there was another research effort that we undertook to explore how some of those other cities, probably some of the same ones you're thinking of, I believe Woodbury was one of them. We had many conversations with Woodbury about how it structured the renaming of one of its large athletic complexes out there. Trying to gain a deeper understanding of the process and the sort of best practices of going about that. We looked into some specific opportunities related to some of the improvements that were being envisioned in recent years, and we encountered some challenges related to the financing of those projects and in linking in naming rights to that to a project that was financed in certain specific ways. So I think that we very much remain interested in the opportunities that are there as well. We need to just be mindful of the limitations in the IRS code and in other ways in order to Be mindful when we're structuring those financing deals and financing packages so that it does allow the space to have that creativity.
Great, thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions for the city attorney? Not seeing any other questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up is the administration department.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm with you most Wednesday nights, but tonight I get to present on the administration department, which I head up here at the city. So,
You should say your name so people who know who you are.
sure. Chris Wilson, Assistant City Manager. The administration department here at the city consists of the city manager's office, our human resources division, and our city clerk's office, a subset of which is the motor vehicle or deputy registrar office here at the city of Bloomington. So I'll talk to you briefly about our budget, staffing, and the services provided by each of these divisions. Taking a look at the budget, you can see each of our three divisions. The city clerk's office is the largest, and that's largely a function of staffing levels, at about 1.5 million in expenses, about $1 million to run our HR operation, and about 840,000 for the city manager's office. As you can see, personnel costs are by far the largest category of expense in each of these departments. We don't buy vehicles, we don't buy road salt, we don't buy much beyond the occasional office supply. So the vast majority of our expenses are in wages and benefits. Down near the bottom of this chart, you'll see something called chargebacks. Each of these divisions provides services to all of our city departments. And for the most part, we do not charge those internal customers for our services. The exception, however, would be the services we provide to non-general fund operations. Those are mostly our enterprise funds that we're trying to run sort of like a business where their revenue covers their cost of operating. In order to have an accurate cost of what it takes to operate our utilities division, you need to keep in mind that we do all of their hiring for them. The finance department does their payroll and their accounts payable and so on. So each of these offices receives some chargeback funds from places like utilities, golf courses, motor vehicle, etc. We have a little over 28 FTEs in our administration department. The city manager's office has 4 full-time employees. HR has 6 full-time and 1 part-time. City clerk's office has 8 full-time and 1 part-time. And the motor vehicle office has 6 full-time and 3 part-time employees. These staffing levels have been relatively stable over the years. The newest addition, though, did come in this year's budget with the addition of our racial equity coordinator, Faith Jackson, who you've heard from previously. So, primary functions or services that the city manager's office provides are leadership and coordination. We sort of serve as the link between the mayor and council and the other departments of the city. A lot of our time is spent on strategic planning and the council's strategic priorities. Racial equity as a priority of the city is specifically within the city manager's office. As I said, Ms. Jackson is part of our office. And then the city manager's office also does a lot of our engagement with community partners and our legislative delegations at both the state and the federal level, supported by Shane Rudling from our Port Authority. But Jamie does a lot of interaction with the chamber, with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the school district, the county, our neighboring cities, etc. Some priorities we have in the city manager's office that we were just on the cusp of getting started to address when this pandemic hit would be updating the council strategic plan. They are in what was called to be the final year of the current strategic plan. And we had been in conversations with the council about embarking on a broader community-based strategic planning process. I believe that agenda item was actually pulled from the council agenda on March 16th, if I remember correctly. And the other initiative that we were on the cusp of starting was an enhanced level of performance measurement, where we're really benchmarking our services in using the data we collect in a strategic way to guide our operations. We had conducted first round interviews for a fellow from a national city managers organization that would have been with us for 2 years, and their primary function was going to be to support that performance measurement initiative. Both of those efforts were put on hold when the pandemic struck, and as our budget sits now for 2021, there will not be the resources to make substantial strides in either of those areas in the short term. They remain on our list as things that we want to do, but the staffing just isn't there at the moment. Human Resources Department is responsible for all of our recruitment and hiring, the collective bargaining agreements with our 5 employee unions, setting compensation and benefit levels, both in the union and non-union environment, our personnel policies, things including our respectful workplace policy, safety policies to some extent, drug testing policies, that type of thing. We do some employee training. A lot of employee training is done and funded at the department level on specific things, but we focus on training in supervisors and training employees on things like preventing sexual harassment and that type of thing. And then we also do a fair amount of compliance work. We handle the city's workers' compensation claims, FMLA leave, ADA compliance, and a variety of other regulatory functions that the city needs to meet as an employer are the responsibilities of the Human Resources Division. And you get to our city clerk's office. The city clerk's office handles records management for the city, so everything we take in as information is governed under both state law as well as city policy. So we control how long we keep data and official records of the city, as well as provide public access to that data through the data request process. That's an increasing challenge for us as a city. It affects all of the city's departments, but the coordination and efforts to keep a high level of compliance are handled in the city clerk's office. City clerk's office is responsible for licensing, and they serve largely as the record keeper and administrator while partnering with a number of other departments. So, for example, licensing to sell tobacco and liquor licensing runs through the city clerk's office in partnership with the police department, who ensures compliance. We license rental housing in hotels and restaurants in partnership with our environmental health inspectors and division, contractors in partnership with the building and inspection staff, and a variety of other licensing. We license massage therapists, tattoo parlors, pawn shops, things like that. Passports. Not at this exact moment, but in general, you can make an appointment and come to Civic Plaza and get a passport from our city clerk staff. That service was suspended in late March, and we have yet to resume due to the backlog at the national level. We're a passport agent of this U.S. State Department. We are resuming that operation as of September 21st, so that does bring in some revenue to the department. That revenue will be significantly diminished this year, and we are budgeting for it to remain slow next year, considering that we expect the demand for international travel to remain relatively low. Elections. The city clerk's office handles our elections. This year they've conducted 3 elections with a presidential primary in March, the regular primary about a few weeks ago in August, and then they are currently preparing to handle a presidential election in the midst of a pandemic. We do elections every year, however, because the mayor and city council elections are held in the odd-numbered calendar year, and we partner with the school board. So our elections budget has sort of a 4-year roller coaster to it, with presidential election years costing us the most, followed in 2 years later, the gubernatorial elections cost us a little bit less, and then the 2 years where we're running municipal elections are the least. So fortunately, we are headed into one of our least expensive election years in a municipal year. And then lastly, we, again, in partnership with our park maintenance department, we handle the business aspect of the city cemetery while they handle the maintenance aspect of it. So the sale of cemetery burial lots and columbarium niches through the city cemetery is business that's transacted by the city clerk's office. And then lastly, as I mentioned, part of the city clerk's office is our motor vehicle or deputy registrar office. If you are following the city's budget conversations last spring, there was significant conversation about the future of the motor vehicle office. So I thought in my last couple slides I'd go into just a little bit more detail and background on that division. So at the Bloomington Motor Vehicle Office, you can renew your driver's license or obtain an enhanced ID or a real ID. You cannot take a driving test at our office. So tests have to be done at testing stations, either road tests or written tests. But other license transactions, if you moved, if you changed your name, if you lost your license, if it needs to be renewed, those types of things our staff handles. We do motor vehicle registration and title transfers, so getting your tabs for your license plates every year is probably the most common transaction there. Then we are also an agent for the DNR and licensed recreational vehicles such as ATVs, boats, and snowmobiles. We do not do hunting licenses for the DNR, just things that are closer to the vehicle side of things. Our motor vehicle office is run by 6 full-time and 3 part-time employees. One full-time staff person retired earlier this summer, and we have left that position open for 2 reasons: the budget uncertainty that the city faces, but at this point, we are also operating at a reduced capacity. So the motor vehicle office was enclosed entirely from late March until very early June. I want to say maybe June 2nd from memory, but I might not be right on that. When we reopen, though, we are operating at 50% capacity in compliance with the governor's orders, and also by appointment only in order to provide social distancing. If you think back to your most recent motor vehicle experience in person, they often involve waiting rooms full of people. And so we, in order to avoid that, we are operating on an appointment only basis. Unfortunately, that is significantly impacting our revenues as well. So the motor vehicle office was facing challenges from a financial perspective well before the pandemic hit us. The fee revenue we collect simply does not cover the operating cost to operate this office. And it might not be readily apparent as you go, if you stop at a motor vehicle office and you write a check, and sometimes that check's for several $100s for license tab renewals and so on, depending on the value and the age of your vehicle. But only a very small portion of that check you write is actually revenue that's retained at the city level. The vast majority of it is sent off to the state of Minnesota, and it just passes through us. Literally on a daily and weekly basis, that money goes off to the state. The city has absolutely no control over the fees that we are allowed to retain because they are set by state statute, and it takes legislative action to increase them. And the legislature sets them at a flat dollar amount, not even at a percentage. Once upon a time, this office did generate excess revenue for the city, but it has needed an increasing amount of financial support from some other source in addition to the fees it collects for several years. For 2021, to keep the office open, we will need $225,000 in property tax support. Just a quick look at that fee type. So if you go to our office to renew your motor vehicle tabs, we retain $7. That's up $1. Last summer, or last 2019 legislative session included a $1 increase. So we went from $6 to $7, but it had been 7 years since we had seen any increase in that dollar amount. Based on our transaction counts, that dollar increase we thought would yield us $50,000 in extra revenue this year, but obviously with the closure and now the appointment-only service, we're not going to see that. Motor vehicle title transfers also went up $1 last July after having been the same for 7 years. Driver's licenses are $8, and that hasn't changed since July of 2014. And DNR transactions, which are a relatively small part of our business, we keep $4 to $7, and those haven't changed since the early 2000s. As you can imagine, our personnel costs, our health insurance costs have increased in these times while our fees have not. Our transaction counts dipped when the state made a major software change a couple of years ago, and they have stabilized, but they have not returned. And the reason for that is that the state, when they created new software, they pushed a larger portion of the transaction onto local offices. So now we have to do a transaction that takes us more time, but we collect the same amount of revenue, and therefore we're unable to do as many transactions as a day. I want to stress that our staff across the department, but particularly in the motor vehicle office, they work from the minute they unlock that door. There's a line outside that door in the days before we had appointment only. They serve customers from the minute they walk in until the minute they leave. I don't think there is any added capacity or ability to process more transactions for the staff we have than they're already processing. There have been legislative efforts to seek increased fees for local offices. I believe in each of the last 3 legislative sessions, there are already plans underway to seek fee increases, particularly, I think, for the driver's license area in the 2021 session. But we are at the legislature's mercy, and whether they will see this as a priority given everything else going on in our state and our world remains to be seen. And if they do something similar in magnitude to what they did last summer, it will likely not close our budget gap, even with a fee increase. It would help. It would certainly help. But I want to also point out the driver's license. We collect $8. That's what we've been getting since July of 2014. And now they've added Real ID, which again takes significantly longer for our staff to process that transaction. But we still get just $8 for it. So the economics are very challenging. This gives you an idea of the fee revenue that we are bringing in. In 2017, about $589,000. That was the year late in the fall, I believe, of 2017, or maybe it was July, that they implemented the new software. For 2018, we were down at 553. For 2019, we were up a little bit at 581. We had budgeted and hoped that we were going to bring in $605,000 in revenue this year. Like I said, that is not going to happen given the closure and the appointment-only status. So back in 2017, this fund needed a little bit of help to get by. So we took the revenue that we were getting off of passports, which are done in a different building by different staff, but we took that revenue and sent it to the motor vehicle budget to keep that fund going. And we did that again in 2018. In 2019, they were getting the passport revenue, and then they were also they needed property tax revenue for the first time in a while. In 2020, they continued to need the property tax revenue, and we had some positive budget performance from a previous year that we were able to, from another area of the city, that we were able to transfer into this fund. So you'll see that in 2020, this fund needed $250,000 of outside support to cover its costs. And the minimum we need for 2021 is $225,000. Those are the slides I have for you on the administration department. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, either about motor vehicle or the other areas of the department.
Thank you. So I do have one question about the motor vehicle in particular, and when I look at the kind of pricing pressure that the legislature has created, and I look at the staffing model, which is the FTE staffing model with the fully burdened kind of costs associated with that, it seems like one one thing that if we wanted to keep that operation going would be to go to a staffing model that didn't have quite as much burden on it as full-time staff. And I'm wondering if you have considered alternative staffing models for how that office works and whether that would improve the chance of the office being viable in the future.
As I said, we have 3 part-time staff in that department or in that service area of the city currently. We see the most turnover in our part-time staff, and this is an area that we need people who understand the pretty complex software. So it takes us months to get a new employee. One, they have to be sort of certified by the state to do this work, so trained on the software and approved to do this work. They have to be fingerprinted and so on. So that's been a challenge for us with the turnover we see at the part-time level to maintain that. I'm not saying that it couldn't be done to try to operate with more part-time staff and less full-time staff, but we have struggled to keep part-time staff in that area.
Okay. Akia.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions. I'm not sure if you mentioned it in your presentation, but how much does it cost the city to run the office explicitly for the either like the IDs or the passports? Because I guess my question is, from the last slide where we had 73,000, or wrong number, actually, from the passports it was 88,000, but did that offset how much it cost you to provide that service to this community?
It does. Our passport revenues, when they stay in the office that provides the service, offsets the personnel costs of doing the work and provides us a little bit of extra. I'm talking maybe $12,000, $15,000 the last time I did the math. So there, at least passport service is carrying its own weight in terms of the personnel we put into it.
And then what about the tabs and the DNR type activities?
No, they're mixed into this. They're part of this fee revenue that you see on the top line here.
Yeah.
And they're mixed in there, so.
John Locks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, it shows that for 2021, we'll need $225,000 in property tax support. Where does the person that you're short now, is that included in this, or would that be additional?
It's included in this. Our thought process to date is that if we keep the office open, we would fill the vacant position in order to be able to have lower wait times, in order to be able to provide a level of service that we are proud to put the city of Bloomington's name on it. It's not an absolute. We could continue operating at the current staffing level. It will reduce our transactions, but our transactions don't cover our costs anyway, so.
Okay, thank you.
John Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris. I just want to stay on this motor vehicle thing for a minute more. I'm assuming that if the city of Bloomington closed the city of Bloomington motor vehicle office, that the load would fall on largely the Hennepin County service centers. Is that fair? I know there are a few private ones, but basically the county?
I believe so, yes. Depending on where you are located in the city of Bloomington, you might go to the Hennepin County Service Center at Southdale Mall in Edina. Mm-hmm. If you're in the southern part of the city near 35, you might hop on and go down to Burnsville. Same thing if you're in the far eastern side over by Cedar Avenue, you might jog over to Eagan for your needs. This is a service that you do not have to get in the city you live in. So if you need a building permit, and you live in Bloomington, you've got to come to us for your deck permit, right? For this service, we serve anybody, any Minnesotan who needs their driver's license renewed or their motor vehicle tabs renewed or whatever. And the same is true of our residents. Many of our residents do use our Bloomington office. Others use an office that is convenient to where they work or, travel on a regular basis. But if we were to discontinue providing this service, there's a deputy registrar appointment that the state issues. And so it would go back to the state. And my understanding is that the state would offer it to Hennepin County first, to see if they want to operate an office in Bloomington. And if Hennepin County passes on it, then a private individual, a private business could seek to obtain that deputy registrar appointment. The challenge with that is that there are rules around those appointments, and you're supposed to be in a 10-mile radius, not within a 10-mile radius of any other office. I don't have it right at hand, but I had showed the council this summer what part of Bloomington is within a 10-mile radius of another office. And I mean, you could maybe put one on the banks of the river really, really far south, but the vast majority of our land is. So Hennepin County would have to give basically permission for another entity to open an office in Bloomington.
So my sense is that if that office closed, Hennepin County would either establish a Bloomington office or get a substantial increase in the work that's got to be done out of their service center at Southdale. And so it leads me to wonder if we've explored or could explore some partnership opportunities with Hennepin County where they might share in the $225,000 shortfall nut that we've got here, or is that just unreasonable?
I don't think it's, completely out of the bounds, but and I'm not super familiar with Hennepin County's operations, but it's my understanding that they're putting property tax support into their service centers as well. So would they be up for providing more property tax support, to an operation like this? I don't know. I suspect they're dealing with the same challenges we are. The state legislature.
It dawns on me that they are, but that if this office in Bloomington closed, their problems would be significantly increased. And it just feels to me like maybe that's an avenue worth a little bit of time.
If I may, Mr. Chairs and Commissioners, I did have a conversation with Commissioner Gattell, who represents our area, about this specific line of thought that closing the facility would put additional pressure on the Southdale Center. And a couple of our council members had similar thoughts, John, about whether Hennepin County would be incentivized perhaps to partner with us to find a resolution. At the time of that conversation, which was about 2 months ago, I had suggested that maybe they would want to provide some sort of assistance to the city to keep the facility open, right? Thinking that we could buy down our subsidy. This will not surprise you, but Hennepin County is working through some budget issues of their own. They did suggest that perhaps they could help with staff at our facility. During the current operating environment, that doesn't provide us much assistance because we're actually not able to pass through the normal number of people anyway because of the social distancing requirements and the way we have the station set up. So having more staff, being able to process more transactions doesn't help us currently. It might be something we're willing to look at in the future if the decision is to keep the facility open.
Thank you.
Josh?
Mr. Chair, members, Chris, are there other new technologies that would allow us to increase the quality of services to the public and save costs that could be deployed, some sort of online solutions? I recognize there are barriers where there are some people who don't have access to technology, and that's a serious issue. But are there ways to improve the quality of services and save costs here? Is there anything looming out there? I've just been impressed by some of the technology that have come online since COVID has hit to try to help reshape our economy and reshape the way we do things.
The move to online has benefited the state at the expense of local offices. So you can now renew your tabs online. That is our fastest, easiest to provide transaction that provides us with some revenue. And now you don't have to come to your local office to do that. You can do that online. The technologies we use, every piece of software is state purchased, state rolled out, down to like what credit card servicing company we can use. So there's not much freedom there, and the move to online, those revenues go straight to the state. So that is a negative for us in this particular case. We're using transaction or technology in the sense of, when we moved to appointment only, we had, we have an online system for scheduling your passport appointments. Now we quick train some more people up, and now we're using that online system to schedule your motor vehicle appointment. We've looked into, and as soon as we can sort of go to the next level of service at motor vehicle in the pandemic, a technology called No Wait Inside. So you get there and it sort of you text that you're in the parking lot, and then it pings you. Some restaurants use something similar. So we've looked at things like that. But I don't see a lot of hope for that to fundamentally change. Now we're getting the disastrous MNLARS rollout that happened and caused so many problems. We are scheduled to be closed for a couple days in November for the rollout of MNLARS replacement. We can hope that that software works better than MNLARS and that it allows us to process a few more transactions in an hour if it's, really user-friendly for the staff at the counter and that kind of thing. I have not seen a demo or anything of it. Our deputy registrar is really in tune with what that software change means. So I suppose there's a slight chance that a good software there makes us more efficient, but it's a statewide deal. It's nothing that the city of Bloomington controls.
Mr. Chair, members, Chris, is there, in terms of the building, and as I've been over there a number of times myself and thoroughly appreciate the service and hospitality, is there savings, is there space here in this building where they can move over to try to save costs on the building, or?
Not readily at hand. When we were looking at building a community center, say this time last year, the Parks and Recs offices would have moved to the community center, and we had sort of a tentative plan to move motor vehicle here. Would have to do a little bit of remodeling. If there were some other significant change in what services are provided out of this building, we do have to meet some strict standards for separation of our passport services from our driver's license services in order to maintain. And so that's why I said even if Parks and Rec had moved out, we would have had to wall off a space because you can't have back of the house access from your passport to your other services. So, and secondly, honestly, that wouldn't save us money because of the way we charge for building space. The per square footage space and occupancy charge to be here at Civic Plaza is higher than it is. Thankfully, they're not charging us much for that building over at Logan because it's not a particularly fancy building. We've looked at the possibility of leasing space to motor vehicle, try to get it out in a really more visible, highly trafficked space. But again, we are hampered by that 10-mile radius. We do not meet the 10-mile radius currently. We're just grandfathered in. I feel fairly confident that the state would allow us to move across the street into another city-owned building, but I don't even know if they would let us move, say, to Lyndale and 98th, kind of in one of those storefronts or something, because, again, we don't comply now, and so that would be a challenge.
Did that answer your question, Chas?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to. So the thing that I'm thinking about here, and I'm a customer of the office. I like going there. In fact, I have an envelope ready for my car tabs to go over there. And
We have a new drop box that you can drop your car tabs off in,
Okay.
right outside the door.
Yeah. I usually go and put them in the water box, and then they seem
They
to
make
find-
their way over there.
They make their way to
gradually,
the right spot, and one of the staff might find the tabs in their inbox at the office here to bring to me at the next meeting to save a stamp. But the fundamentals. When I look at the fundamentals of this business, okay, here's the fundamentals of the business as I look at it: is that the revenues of the business are basically flat, okay, and the way it's been described is from our productive capacity of the business. You know, the people who are in there from the time the door is open to the time the door is closed are in there processing transactions. So our ability to kind of capture marginal capacity and generate more revenue that way is really limited. And then I go and I look at, and I take the small version of that chart, and I kind of add up the numbers, and I look at the 2017 kind of subsidy of 10.8%, 2018 12.5%, 2019 26.8%, and then at least budgeted for 2020, it's not going to turn out this way. It was 33%, and I look at all of those trends put together, and what it tells me is if you want to run this as a business and have it pay for itself, which is the concept of something like this, it's not a great business. Not a great business at all. And we're really on a trajectory where in a couple of years you could easily be at like a 50-50 subsidy and revenue sort of situation, and at a $250,000 worth of subsidy, and I know it's booked in the chart there as 125 from property tax revenues and 125 from reserves, but we can safely assume that if we went backwards from those reserves, that money came from someplace, and it probably came from the taxpayer's pocket. So we can think of that whole $250,000 as something that came from taxes. It's on a trajectory to be like 1% of the total kind of property tax cost of the whole city, to kind of subsidize that. If you look at these trends and you look ahead 5 or 6 years here, and it just doesn't, given you have to ask the question, is it worth spending that much money to have that service be here in the city? And that's, it's convenient. I love it. I like getting in my car and driving through one stoplight and having this as a service. But there's got to be a limit to it, and at least that's kind of where I come down on it. So, other folks with comments?
It's a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
We're majoring in the minors here. It's $250,000, and it serves an awful lot of people in Bloomington. It doesn't always have to work. I mean, and given our $6 million deficiency, this isn't going to do much to hurt it or help it. So I suggest we move on.
Any other comments? Any other
Mr. Chair,
questions?
I got a question there.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. The question is, if we ended up closing the vehicle services building, is there anything that we're required to keep it open for X amount of days before we can close it? Or if we make that decision, is it automatically closed like the next day? Is there something that will drag it into 2021 or extend us having to keep it open longer?
I do not believe there would be a significant delay. We might have a 2 or 3 week notice that we are closing. We have to arrange with the state to come and take back our inventory of license plates and tabs and things that are sort of highly regulated and securely stored. But I mean, it's not a secret that the council considered not reopening it after it had closed due to the pandemic. And we were looking at needing about 14 or 21 days to wrap things up, had that been the decision. So.
Any other questions or comments? Not just focused on motor vehicle, but anything that on Chris's presentation. Okay, thanks a lot. Next up, we have the finance department, and it looks like Lori is coming forward.
There it is. Good evening, co-chairs and committee members. The finance department's, we'll go right into our vision statement. So finance, we are a team of dedicated professionals whose diverse strengths are used to create the positive, responsible, and accountable environment necessary to accomplish an accurate and transparent accounting of public funds and provide exceptional customer service for our internal and external customers. The picture that you see there is the city was doing a number of open houses by department, and we did a Monopoly theme back in November of 2018. So that's a picture of the 24 of us. And so our different business lines is located there. Again, there is 24 staff in finance. On the next slide is just our org chart. Again, a team of 24, and I will go into some of the functional areas later in the presentation. But as we move forward, finance and the City Council's strategic priorities, this was included in your presentation of how finance kind of works in some of the different areas of the Council's strategic priorities. And just kind of giving you an idea of the connectedness of how some of these priorities work. In 2018, a team with Public Works and Legal and our Kennedy and Graven, our bond counsel, we issued green bonds. We were the 4th city in the metro to issue green bonds. So a very sustainable area, but it was for flood mitigation and water quality control. And that's through our storm pond. So we issued debt for that. That particular project had been in our CIP for well over 10 years before it got funded and moved forward. It took a lot of meetings with the city council. There were special assessments with the businesses involved. So, when we look at that type of project at Knox and American, it fit under community amenities, community image. It's not flooding anymore. Last year we had a lot of rain and it didn't flood. Again, the sustainability was in that project, community renewal, high quality, because of all the workings of council and staff to get that project done. It really moved forward. And part of the engagement and transparency, part of that bond issue for green bonds requires disclosure of certain information. So today we posted on our website, and it's posted out in the bonding world, which we call EMMA, an electronic area of where we put a lot of our disclosure information, how we met the goals of that sustainability project. So one project met several of the strategic goals of the City Council. Moving forward, in 2019, in late July and early August, all of the city staff did budget presentations to the City Council, and the City Council, for 2 full days, listened to those budget presentations, and then they gave us feedback on what each department's story was and expectation from the council's perspective. So here is the finance story in providing outstanding services to internal and external customers. We are charged with developing policies and procedures to account for all the funds received and spent. And we have a long-standing history of a lot of awards for our financial management reporting. And the council expects us to be proactive in continuing to provide high-quality services and meet industry standards when we do those. So moving forward, one of finance's main objectives is to protect the assets of the city. And we do that working collaboratively with the different departments. We have our financial management policies are listed online, and several of other neighboring cities have utilized those to create their own. So we like to work very hard to be top of the line in our policies. We have risk management and control areas, internal controls, best practices. A number of my staff are part of PRIMA for risk management, government finance officers for areas there, procurement. So we are part of different committees so that we are pulling the best practices from those areas.
We also work hard on our ERP software. Our IT department works very closely with us in regards to our utility software and our finance software. Next week, we have a major upgrade in our finance software, so we do a lot of that. Training. Our procurement area does a lot of training because of how we need to do requisitions, bids, proposals. So they do training frequently, not during COVID, but before that it was at least twice a year we did purchasing training. And then I want to give another example of kind of an internal control that we have. The city receives some CARES money. You might have heard about that. Part of that is that we're going to spend $1.3 million on small business loans. And we contracted with an agency to do those. On a Friday, a couple weeks back, we had gotten an email from them in regards to wire transaction information on what codes to send that money to. And so part of our best practices and internal controls, we followed that and found that that was fraudulent and that someone was trying to have us move that $1.3 million to a wrong account. So based off of our policies, we were able to stymie that attempt to fraud. So best practices work. Moving into some of our functional areas, as you would see, the first one up is payroll, and I think that's one of the most important ones for all of our city employees is that they get paid, and they get paid well every 2 weeks on time. Majority of our staff are direct deposits, so we work with that. We also, so let's see, payroll also verifies under the state and federal regulations. We do all the taxes and the benefit payments, so all the associated state and federal reporting, all the areas for health insurance, we make sure all of those payments move through that. On an average employee payroll is 650 employees, and during non-COVID time, that moved up to about 950 or close to 1,000. Payments were going out every 2 weeks for that. In the area of cash management, we have cashiers, and our cashiers have actually been on site the entire COVID time. They take in the mail, they open the mail, they take the calls. Our calls have actually increased during COVID. And during that, our cash management people track all the monies coming in and out of the city for the city, the port, and the HRA. The finance department is the finance department for each of those organizations. And then we work closely with each of those organizations to invest their money. We have to follow state statutes and our investment policy. As of June 30th, we had nearly $276 million between those three agencies that we were monitoring those investments. And so just a tangent on that, all the monies or the cash that are in all the funds, we pool those together to make sure that we get the best investments that we can and make the best interest that we can. So that 276 would then be redistributed back to each of those funds. So it's not a pool of money to be used to offset this deficit. Utility billing, they process every month 2,300 bills for commercial customers and bi-monthly 24,000 bills for our residents. A couple years ago, we had a goal of we had just put in a new software for online, people coming online to do their billing online, paperless. And we moved over the last year and a half from a 9% utilization to 12% of our customer base is at. And then if I look just at those that allow us to go into their accounts bi-monthly or monthly to pay their bill, 36% of our customer base allows us to go in and do a direct debit into their account. So we're one of the highest ones in the metro citywide that allows, when we compare ourselves to other cities, quite a bit of our customer base allows us to go into their accounts to make their payments. Let's see. Just want to make sure I'm not covering all the good parts. Moving on to accounts payable. In our accounts payable area, they process the checks in electronic funds area. Again, one of the areas that we used in our accounts payable area in our Munis financial software in 2019 is we systematically trained and moved throughout all the city departments for them to do online approvals for their accounts payables. So every Thursday during COVID now is accounts payable day, and we make those payments and write checks. But all those approvals are online now through the departments. In the accounts receivable area, these are all non-utility services. And in 2019, in that area, they brought in over $10 million of billing services for that area. So utility billing is the largest one. The next one is the regular receivables. And so that would be weeds, tree removals, retiree insurances, police contractual overtime. Some of those are some of those areas. And then special assessments. Our receivable, we have just one person there. She takes calls from all the properties that might be sold in Bloomington, the process for that. And people make that phone call in and ask for pending assessments. And so she will research that and work with the title company to make sure that they have all the appropriate information. In 2019, she addressed 2,900 different properties for title searches. Moving on to our auditor position. We have one person in the audit, and she does the sales tax audits for lodging, liquor, and admission. There's approximately 146 different locations. Some could be duplicate where there's a restaurant selling liquor in a hotel. She also currently is working primarily on all of our CARES, FEMA, and grant activities. And she's one of the essential people that work on our forecasting area for moving forward in regards to the sales tax activities in regards to liquor, admission, and lodging. One more point on that. Our auditor tends to, when she goes and audits the locations, brings in more revenue than what she costs. So just in 2019, she brought in just under $130,000 of activities by her audit work. In financial operations accounting, again, we process all the information in regards to monthly, quarterly, annual reports. We post those on our website. This year, they actually also did our comprehensive annual financial audit with our auditors remotely. So that was, through COVID, very interesting to try to do a remote audit. And then all of the accountants there also are assigned budgets. So, they have their ebb and flow of accounting work and audit work. And as one piece gets done, they work on TIF reports, and then they work on budgets. So the accountants throughout the city constantly have a workflow that they're working on. Purchasing. Purchasing oversees the purchases of the city to stay in compliance with all laws governing public purchasing, as well as staying abreast and incorporating best practices. That team manages the solicitation process, including bids, quotes, and requests for proposals. So they're working constantly in coordinating with different departments for all of those. Many of our purchases are made through cooperative agreements, and currently we have over 100 different cooperative agreements. So if you're not aware of what a cooperative agreement is, it's, for example, the state has a whole list of products that we can go buy that they've already done the whole RFP process for. So it simplifies our process and makes us more efficient to use these cooperative processes. Our purchasing area also manages our P card program. We have about 200 individuals in the city that have P cards. Purchasing also does contract management, change orders, and maintains our vendor records. And then, as legal indicated earlier, we share Amy Larson, and Amy does risk and litigation management. So she does a lot of stuff for legal. 40% of her time is charged there. 60% of her time is charged to finance. And her primary focus in finance is risk and litigation management. She helps identify and assess risks associated with the city's operations, and where appropriate, recommends risk financing alternatives. Amy also manages all of the city's insurance. So the city has been a part of the Legal Minnesota Trust since 1986, and the city purchases through that trust our municipal liability, auto, and property coverage. Last year, our total premium for these policies was just under $575,000, and our average premium over the last 5 years has been just under $550,000. This trust, the LMC Trust, membership is pretty much every city in the state is a member of that trust. And depending on the loss history, we are hopeful each year to get a premium back if that trust did not sustain a lot of loss. We have gotten premiums back in the past, and the last one that we received, or the last average over the last 5 years, it's been about $107,000 back. Risk management also purchases additional standalone policies for medical professional liability, public health, fireworks, and liquor liabilities for our parks and recs. These policies are purchased through the open market, and their premiums amount to just under $20,000. In addition, our purchasing of insurance, risk management also is responsible for all the claims and litigation brought against the city, so that's more the legal side. Works with Human Resource to administer and fund our self-insurance workers' compensation program. And then they review all the certificates and insurance for all of the contracts processed through the legal department. And then Amy coordinates our safety program throughout the city. In the administrative area, so you have the entire administrative staff in the room with you, with myself, Kari, and Brianna. And so we coordinate with the accountants and the different departments and the city managers. So we bring 31 budgets through the city council. We work on the property tax with a number of departments on that. We produce the annual budget book, the annual corporate report. And we file the preliminary levies and manage all the paperwork with the levies through the county, making sure all the budget activities published where it needs to be. We work on the 10-year capital improvement program, and that one we are actually moving forward. So we've been talking about the CIP already this year. We brought to council in April new criteria to help us prioritize our improvements. Departments have presented those improvements, and we're working through each of the pieces on that to prioritize them, and we'll be putting that document together, and hopefully we will have the first draft to council of that document in October with a hopeful approval of that document in December. We also work on debt management. So any debt issue is moved through the finance department and myself. We look at different activities. So as we're moving forward right now, we've done a number of our payment management program activities. So we will be selling debt in November, and hopefully the interest rates will be very low for that. Fire Chief Yuli Seal, Councilmember Dwayne Lohman, and myself sit on the Fire Pension Board with the trustees. We look at the pension obligations, the actuary report, and then we help with their investment portfolio. One of the other areas that takes a great deal of time is the different areas of development. So some of those would be the Normandale area, or just the different areas at Penn and American, France and Old Shakopee, all the different areas that are under development or starting to be developed in the South Loop. So any projects that there's tax increment financing, any areas with the HRA, Mall of America projects, the new Gateway project, finance is at the table with those city staff working on those projects. So Kari has put together this slide. When I look at this slide, this is our net budget request of $1.2 million. Finance total budget is about $3.2 million, but we are able to, as Chris had indicated on one of hers, we have the ability to do a chargeback is what we do in finance. So when I look at a portion of my cash management staff, they are opening up utility bills. So I'm going to gather their time on that and charge the utility funds. The 5 individuals that I have, that's got that 0 line there, all of their costs that we operate as the customer service piece, we charge the 4 utility funds so that it's not property tax supported for those individuals. A portion of a risk management goes to legal budget, and then the other 60% that Amy does risk management work, we charge that to the internal service fund for risk management and insurance because her work is insurance related. So our net budget here is $1.2 million, and when I look at that in depth, 80% of that, or 960,000, are people. 13%, similar to Chris's number, or percentage-wise, 156% of that number, or 156,000, are internal service funds, and 7% of that number, or 84,000, are materials and supplies. So in our area there, we have materials, supplies, training, consultants. When we put an insert in our truth and taxation notice, Hennepin County bills us, we pay that fee. So some of that activity is not, even though it's materials and supplies, it's not quite discretionary where we can't not do it. So that's a finance budget. When I look at some points of pride, the city is a AAA city. We've had some conversation about the risks associated with that AAA with the council. So as we have different areas that we look at, we will try to do a risk assessment to the council to let them know where we think the AAA may have some risk. And so right now we are one of 40 cities nationwide out of 19,000 that have the AAA. We've had the Distinguished Budget Award for 24 years. The Gfoa Certificate of Achievement, 48 years. So now that we've submitted the 2019 CAFR, that would be our 49th. We are number 3 in line nationally on that one. There's one county and one city in the country that have more awards than we do in regards to the Gfoa Certificate of Achievement. So there's not another one in the state within our age by 10 years. So the Gfoa Award for Outstanding Achievement, so the popular report or the corporate report that's part of the briefing in June, we've submitted that for 21 years. So we participate with the different award programs from the Gfoa because it helps us be more transparent. Our product is at the high level, but it is at a normal best practice level too. So just going, final thoughts. The finance department is a streamlined, efficient, and critical function of the city. Similar to some of the administrative areas and legal areas, I think we're part of the backbone of kind of like the unsung heroes that just make sure the transactions move and flow. We provide the financial information and support necessary to operate effectively and support all departments in planning and decision making. And whether that be a day-to-day functions such as billing and payroll or the broader planning functions of the annual budget process and conservative debt management, we protect the city's assets, advise leadership on critical spending and funding decisions, and support the day-to-day financial operations across the entire scope of the city. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Lori. Questions? John Gibbs.
Thank you, Laura. I can't imagine there's real money in coming out of this discussion, but one question comes to my mind that might be simple, and that is, if the city of Bloomington sought a rating from 2 rather than 3 rating agencies, would that save the city material money, or would the cost of debt get materially higher? I mean, is there any opportunity there? I don't believe there's any requirement to get 3 rating agencies into this game, right?
If we have a year where we're issuing multiple times during the year, only once during the year will I get 3 ratings. The rest of the time I will only get 1.
Okay.
And the actual rating costs tend to be about $15,000.
Oh, okay.
Other questions?
Well,
Neil.
Lori, I think that you're in a group that's been in the city for a long time. I think back to Lyle Olson days, and then he was followed by, she's over at Springstead now,
Terry Heaton.
Baker Tilly.
Lori Heaton, and then you, right?
Yes.
So there's been a very long history of financial management here, which is greatly appreciated, and thank you.
Yep. In 1 month, I'll have 18 years. Terry was CFO for 5, and Lyle was here for close to 30.
Yeah, okay. The question I picked up on, you mentioned the AAA bonding rating, and then you said that the council, you were talking with the council and evaluating it, or I didn't write it down correctly, so.
To dig into that one, when we were looking at the water park, and we explored, so if Three Rivers issues debt and Hennepin County issues debt and the school district issues debt, those are all overlapping debts that affect Bloomington residents and their ability to pay that debt for all agencies. And one of the credit rating agencies wanted to take all of that overlapping debt, in addition to a good portion of a water park debt that we had no obligation for, no moral financial obligation for, and wanted to put it on our books. And with that, it would make us lose our AAA. So it was a question of how they interpreted that. We spent many hours on the phone with that particular agency, with multiple bond attorneys, with Baker Tilly and people on their staff that had been credit analysts for different agencies, trying to get their thinking of why they would do that to us. And at this point, we're not building a water park, so hopefully that one's on pause for a long time.
Take me back to my probably a silly question, but are we maintaining reserves that are there because we're trying to maintain the AAA rating? That if we elected to, the council decided they go down to a AA or an A, that would free up some money?
When I look at the reserves in individual funds, those reserves are based off what that fund needs, not what a AAA needs. It's what the fund needs to operate and move forward, so that, as the city manager, Jamie said, if we bring our fund balances down too low, we're not going to be able to do a lot. It's really restricting us. The benefit of having some of those reserves is helping us have a AAA. But the main goal is to make sure that that fund can do what it needs to do.
Okay, we're not buying our way into AAA.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Josh.
Mr. Chair, members, so what's the risk of jeopardizing the ratings if this group or the council made some irresponsible decisions? What's the risk as you look over in your crystal ball?
Well, could you
Well, just if we went from
narrow that?
if we went from the triple A rating down, what's the risk of that happening if we don't make responsible decisions here in the next 6 months? Are there things that we could do here that could jeopardize that?
Definitely. I mean, if part of the different categories, and I could provide the different categories that they look at, is that they would look at the willingness to raise taxes to do what we need to do. If it hasn't happened in the city during here, but other cities, management and council have fought on air. Is that the bad thing to say? That would get in the public eye, and then they would evaluate that. There's different categories. I mean, they'll look at the whole metro as one of the economic pieces. So if they look at the metro and the employment's down metro-wide, not just Bloomington, those pieces all pull apart in how they look at us. So economics are economics, things that we have no ability to change the buying power of our residents. Those are things that they will look at, all of those criteria.
If I can jump in, Mr. Co-Chairs and committee members, Josh, maybe Lori can back me up on this, but each of the ratings agencies have a little bit of a black box in terms of what their formula is, and we have a general outline that we can use to prognosticate. But there are some factors that we're not aware of, or we don't know how they weight or leverage. The example that Lori gave about the overlapping debt was a new one to us. I think for the purpose of the committee, the recommendations that the committee might make, or that the actions that the council might take that potentially jeopardize the credit rating, if that's a concern, are probably more focused on utilizing one-time dollars and creating structural imbalance in the budget, and what that has as an effect in subsequent years. Because one of the really important factors they look at is just predictability, it's financial management, and making sure that there isn't a continuing crisis that's being created by budget decisions. So wanting to see if there is a use of one-time dollars, that there is a plan to resolve that in future years. I think that's, for this committee, probably the biggest issue to grapple with.
That's great. Mr. Chair, Jamie, if the converse of there being political dysfunction in a local government body you could put forth this process in which the city had the vision of bringing people in and having robust discussion and try to build some consensus as a reason to protect that credit rating. I just submit that for consideration.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation, because I don't know how significant of a factor it is, but having a stable political environment is a factor. And to the extent that having an engagement process and demonstrated community support for the decisions that the council is making, how that contributes to the political stability, is probably something that we can talk about when we do those future ratings calls.
On that same point, Jamie and commissioners, we did another disclosure out on Emma this week, and that was in regards to the COVID. And one of the pieces that we did talk about in that disclosure, and we can send that link to the committee, was talking about this committee and bringing you forth is what the council had done to help with addressing the deficit for next year. So you have been mentioned.
Other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Okay, that's anything. Thanks, Lori.
So, Mr. Chair, before we wrap up, I don't know what your concluding comments are, but since we just finished with finance, one of the points that I want to make, and one of the things that is challenging for both staff and the committee as we go forward, and I mentioned this earlier in the process too, is we have certain operations in the city that are just sort of the spinal column for the operations, right? And so the finance function is one that is not discretionary. And I think what you see in Lori's presentation is that there is not, I think, a lot of extra in the finance operation, right? So the finance department was given a target, just like all the other departments were. And so we'll be eager to see what those suggestions from Lori and her team look like next Tuesday when I get them. But it's one of the things that we're going to have to talk about is how we prioritize the reductions that we're going to look at. Is the balancing of discretionary operations versus skinnying up mandated operations. That's what's going to create the challenge as we go forward.
Thank you. So that's it on 4.4. Typically at the end, we just kind of go around the room and have, if anybody's got any reflections or observations. I think Saw is still on the call on what we heard tonight. Seems like we're kind of getting ready to pivot to kind of the next set of conversations here. So where we're actually going to start talking about kind of getting down to brass tacks and talking about specific impacts and specific costs at the next set of meetings. Anybody else have comments? John.
Mr. Chair and members, I've been frustrated to a degree that I think we are too heavily based in electronics, which leaves out a whole bunch of people in the city of Bloomington that don't have the electronics necessary to participate the way we would like them to. I floated an idea and it got no traction. So I'm going to tell you what the idea is and see if I'm nuts or what. The schools as of today have gone to distance learning. They've changed. They were going to have some in-person and now they're not for a period of time, which means all the lunches prepared are takeaway lunches. Why don't we put our information in every one of those lunch packets that goes home with those kids? So you get all the underserved, partial or fully funded lunches along with the rest of them. They all get the information. And I didn't seem to get any traction. I couldn't believe it. I thought it's so simple. And I'll call Les Fujitaki because I know him quite well. And I think he would jump at the idea to be helpful in this whole effort. So I don't think people are thinking outside the box, because that has nothing to do with electronics. It has to do with a lithograph machine that'll turn out copies and stick it in a lunchbox. It's very basic, but I think it gets the message out.
Mm-hmm.
That's creative.
Yeah.
We will brush off our lithograph machines and see if we can do that.
Other comments or questions or suggestions, Josh?
Mr. Chair, members, to the degree that you've given some thought, can you forecast for us kind of how this conversation, debate, and decision making is going to look here, so we can brace ourselves for what's coming over the next few weeks?
Is that a question to me?
I guess so.
So we're going to start hearing conversations about reductions in services from the city, and the city manager is kind of foreshadowed on that. And one of the things that both Neil and I have talked about in the chairs meeting that we have is that it's our job as a community to make choices. And Jamie talked a little bit today about some of those choices may be deciding to cut certain things and not cut other things. Some building how each of these packages is composed will be another set of decisions. But really, we're going to start hearing stuff, and we're going to have to start making our list of stuff that either we want in there or not in there. And so it's going to be up to us to make those decisions over the next couple of weeks. We have, some word of that will start to get out when these middle of September feedback meetings happen, but we won't have a complete set of decisions at that point, and that was intentional in the process. And all of this conversation is probably going to lead up to a set of meetings in those first 2 weeks in October, where we're going to be making those final lists of things and agreeing that this is the proposal that we're going to go out to the public with and get their feedback on. So I think that's really, in the next couple meetings, we're going to have lists, and people are going to have to start, maybe just privately, okay, here's what I think I would do in this situation, so that we're prepared to have that conversation. And then we'll close on that in the meetings, between the, kind of leading up to those October dates to talk to the public. I don't know, Neil, do you have any additional on that? Or is that aligned with what?
No, again, we can make recommendations, but we cannot make the decision.
Yep.
buck stops with the council and the mayor. So the sooner we get it to them and let them start wrestling, whatever we can provide them, we've done our job. If we don't get it to them soon enough, I'm afraid we've maybe defaulted.
And if I can add in there too, Mr. Chairs and committee members, Josh, I think if there's one thing I would ask the committee members to be thinking about when we start talking about those suggestions from department directors, is asking the question, what are the implications? Who's affected? How does it, affect the community in short term and long term? And, some of what are the consequences and what are the alternatives? And really drilling down on those questions, I think will help the committee maybe work through the prioritization of the different cuts and how it ultimately affects the organization, how it affects the community, how it affects individual people. I think part of our conversation maybe should be, this doesn't have to happen right away in September, but I think October, when we start gravitating towards the different options, is what does the committee think are the priorities, or what are the specific values, again, coming back to something that we talked about in the first couple meetings, what are the values that we hold, and how does that reflect itself in the recommendations that the committee is going to make?
Mr. Chairman. And these decisions are going to be extremely painful. And we agreed at the opening meeting that we would come to a consensus, that there wouldn't be a minority report coming out of that committee. And it still defies my logic to think that I can't vote no if I want to. So we're going to have to wrestle with that again, because we're not going to all agree. And it's going to be extremely painful. We're going to have to have the wisdom to decide what's good and what's not as good, because there's no fluff in this city budget. But it's people, a lot of people who have been very endeared their careers to the city, and they're going to get cut. So hold on.
I've been thinking about that, Mr. Chair, and the challenge of getting consensus on this. And I'm relatively confident if we frame the decision by the committee as saying, can we get consensus on these three different options that we will present to the council, and we can live with the council accepting one of these three, as opposed to saying the committee is going to recommend one of these three options. We'll give them all three options, but we're going to have a committee recommendation for one of them. I think it's easier in the first scenario to get consensus by the committee than maybe it is in the second, where we're asking everybody to come to agreement on one of those three things.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, when I talked to folks, I was very specific about saying that we wouldn't recommend a particular scenario, that we were going to propose a set of options that the council could pick from. And I think if you listen to what Neil is saying about where the buck has to stop at the council, it's precisely that, is that unlike the preliminary levy where we went and said, okay, here's a number, with these other two sets of deliverables, we're providing three options. And it's up to the council to make a decision about that, about the final decision. It's our job to make the packages.
So, Mr. Chair,
Mm-hmm.
members, Jamie, so as we lay out these options, maybe a course of action analysis, if you will, are we looking and are we going to put on the record then these are some of the benefits or the consequences of each option to help inform the judgment by the mayor and the council so they can assess risk? So if you think about what is a very professionally run city here that delivers outstanding services, is a part of our job to say, hey, if you hit this option, you may jeopardize some of that.
I think we'll make that clear.
Risk. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
so I think one obvious way to do that is that even based on kind of the trajectory of things, even the most expensive option has some reduction in service in it. Okay, so you're gonna start out with the best scenario that we have coming out of this, that we're gonna come has a reduction in service on it, and you'll be able to articulate what the difference is in the service levels in these three things, and that's the value judgment really that the council is going to have to make, is which of these things are they going to pick, which sets of services are the right set of services, and where does that leave the kind of city's financial position going into 2022 is the other question. So. Any other comments or questions?
As Dylan said, the times they are a changing.
That's right. That's right.
I just have one, Mr. Chair and committee members. Welcome back to SAW. It's good to see you in a meeting again, and hope things are going well at home. You had a little bit of a life change there, so right?
Thank you. Yes, it's been a tiring week, but we're getting there.
Yeah. Well, thanks
Where's
for
that baby?
Yeah, come on, Nick.
Sleeping.
Don't disturb the sleeping baby, Neil. Okay. Unless there's other comments or questions, I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.